Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video with two very special guests who have written a recent work. But before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross as we always do. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so please subscribe, click on that like button, share this video, all that good stuff. Remember, we're always trying to promote, with God's grace, Catholic intellectualism by promoting authors, new and upcoming authors who have written good intellectual works within the Catholic environment. So, well, thank you both of you for coming on.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
Dr. Robert Fastigi and Dr. Deborah Savage, who has written this very interesting tome. And as I always say, if it stands on its own, it's a good book, as a professor of mine used to always say, right? If it's so it's a that's a litmus test. So
Yeah.
they've written this book, Lived Experience and the Search for Truth, and it's about sexual morality, Catholic sexual morality, but kind of the way they go about it. Maybe you guys would disagree with this. It's kind of like a new theological method in a sense, this inductive method, which I think is interesting. It's definitely more attractive, as you mentioned in your book. And then from there, we'll go on to more of the details, especially what you write, Deborah, in your about contraception, which is fascinating. But yeah, Robert, if you can talk a little bit about kind of what led you to write this book. And I know you are as fellow Suarez as I am, and we like to focus on the concrete. Being is essentially individual, right? It's concrete. So
Right,
that
right.
inductive method, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is Dr. Fastigi's way, right? This is the way of Suarez. So if you can explain a little bit kind of what drew you to write this book and kind of a little bit about that inductive method. Start with.
Well, yes. Well, thank you very much. I have to say this book is really the brainchild of Deborah, because there was a conference in Rome in December of 2022, and Deborah participated, as did I. But it was very theological and philosophical, and we were responding to some of the questions raised by this publication of the overseen by the Pontifical Academy for Life, where we thought that some of them, in their own way, some of the essays were challenging Veritatis Splendor and also challenging Humanae Vitae, but in a very subtle sort of way. But what Deborah saw was the need to address lived experience, which is inductive, as you said. We could deal with theoretical discussions of method, objective moral norms, the natural law. All of that is very, very important. But Pope Francis has actually endorsed we remember his Pope Francis's recent passing, but he actually endorsed the context that we have to consider, not only the abstract norms, but the concrete existential situation in which people find themselves. And he's also expressed this as well in his own way in commenting on Amoris Laetitia and others. Look at the concrete situation. You know, when we evaluate the morality of an action, you have to consider the object, the intention, and the circumstances. And I think that all three come together. But I think lived experience is extremely important for sexual morality because we want to hear from people in actual lived situations whether or not the sexual revolution and the dismantling of moral norms, sexual moral norms, has really led to human flourishing.
Right.
And actually, it's just the opposite. People wind up incapable of communicating love, whereas the great teaching, the great wisdom of the church communicated so beautifully in Humanae Vitae and also by John Paul II, then in their own way by Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, who endorsed Humanae Vitae, that we want to hear from people in their own lived experience whether or not Catholic sexual morality has led to human flourishing and happiness.
Right.
And that's really what I think was behind this. But Deborah could explain better than I. So I want to hear from Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah, you actually have written, I think, the most in the work. So that's why I wanted to go
Yeah.
to Robert first because I didn't see he wrote anything. So I wanted to ask him first.
Oh,
But
oh my
I
gosh. No,
mean,
he did lots
yeah,
of work.
yeah, I'm sure he did. Yeah, I'm sure he did a lot.
Mm.
But I didn't see any name in any of the chapters. But you've written three. If you could explain a little bit about this, and maybe because I'm a big critic of the inductive method. After reading your
Yeah.
book, actually, you do see this imbued with the theology of John Paul II, which kind of does. I'm making that connection. It is inductive, but isn't there a danger though of
Well,
focusing on the concrete and kind of not going to the abstract, the universal moral law? And also, if you can tell us about that chapter on Humane Vitae, which is very personal. I appreciated that. That was really and again, it's nice to read from the concrete. If you can talk a little bit about that lived experience with the artificial contraception that you
yeah,
wrote
well, let me uh,
a lot there.
back up just a little bit to say that I was at the conference and I was very impressed, the one in Rome that Robert mentioned, very impressed with it. Obviously, great thinkers, the best in the world on the metaphysics behind our understanding of human sexuality, of the human person. Um, really great scholars that if you want to find a book where all the arguments are laid out, the metaphysical and theological arguments in terms of doctrine, or just the abstract reasoning that's behind our our understanding of the truths of Humanae Vitae, you couldn't look at any further than the book that came out of that conference. But my
Mm,
observation is that we've actually been making those arguments one way or another for
mm,
years.
mm,
And I think that what needs to be faced is that the language of personal experience has taken precedence over the more metaphysical or rational arguments that are on offer in a book like that one. And now we have plenty of rational arguments in ours also, but our argument is that, or at least what we're offering, is that unless we is sort of grounded in this, that unless we figure out how to recapture the territory of lived experience from those who are pretending it's a separate category that gives you all the information you need about what's right and wrong, we won't be able to win this battle. We won't be able to win the war that we're obviously in. So, really, personal experience has become the touchstone of what constitutes truth in our culture anymore, right?
mm,
And so, so that's one thing. The second thing is that because of that, the ch- uh, even some of the theologians in Rome have been um, led to try to articulate a sort of divide between what I call the fruits of right reason and lived experience. Like Pope Francis really he wrote a motu proprio in which he suggested this was after the just as the book came out, I think this
Mhm.
motu proprio came out where he said ad theologiam provenandum, yeah,
Yeah.
in number 8 he says we really need to use inductive method, and so as a reflection of that, but unfortunately what that's become is this false dichotomy introduced into our discourse that there's some kind of gap between experience and the search for truth. So I wouldn't want to indict Pope Francis by any means, but some of the folks in his cohort seem to be saying that we need to let doctrine go. We're too stuck in doctrine. It's too rigid. Desk chair theology is not what people are looking for. And my big concern is that we help people understand that actually the church's own methods, her own arrival at the truth of things, is grounded in lived experience. Um,
Mhm.
John Paul II, in his philosophical work, Carol Wojtyła, says that metaphysics even is an intellectual exploitation of lived experience. Aristotle, Aquinas, they weren't making inventing moral norms out of thin air. They were observing what it took. They were exploring what are the components of a happy life,
Mhm.
um, not through some kind of ideological lens, but by consulting their own lived experience. It's so clear. In Aristotle's case in particular, he starts with the natural world and investigates that and then arrives at norms via the concrete, as you say. There is no universal without a particular. That
Mhm.
whole notion. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but uh, there the what we're trying to accomplish in the book is to help people see the deep connection between lived experience and the arrival at an understanding of what's true. So I can say one last thing by way of introduction. What muddies the water here is that because people are thinking there's this gap between experience and knowing, um, they're starting to the church is turning toward making sure they account for the lived experience of people who want to claim that they possess the truth because after all this is their experience. If you try to say something that doesn't match with their experience, they reject it as untrue. But the evidence, as Robert was saying, the evidence is that when you consult the lived experience of those who have followed the church's teaching, their actual lived experience, what it demonstrates and what we're trying to demonstrate in the book is that in fact the Catholic teaching on human sexuality leads directly to happiness.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So they're consulting the experience of those who are dissenting a priori from the church's quite sound anthropology because it doesn't comport with their own experience, never really facing the fact that what they've done is dismantle our culture. And the data is really clear. Families are breaking down. Sexually transmitted diseases are an epidemic portions. Um, there's just so much evidence, so much data, really, sociological data, that
Right.
this approach hasn't worked. So the lived experience of people who make those claims about their gender or about sexual freedom or all those, it doesn't lead anywhere.
Mhm.
And so that's because, as JP2 will say, experience is only partial. It's only part of the story.
Right.
What one needs to do is with experience as a jumping off place, the knowledge beginning in the senses, all of that is abstract from that to understand what is my experience telling me.
Mhm.
And
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like a hermeneutical circle. You have to revisit it. You try to make sense of your experience, and then you realize you got it wrong, and then you go back to the beginning. There's a hermeneutical circle that has to be pursued in order to arrive at an authentic understanding of the truth. So there's more to say about it, but that's enough
Yeah, that's
of that. Yeah, for now.
and what you're saying is really injecting reason into the lived experience. I mean,
Oh,
is that what it is? It's not like a pure
right.
sentimentalism in the sense that
Oh, no.
you're right,
Yeah,
right,
exactly. So, no, this is one thrust of the human spirit is towards knowing and knowing truly.
Mhm.
And I have sources that help me to begin that method. Inductive method starts with the concrete and moves up. And in fact, that was actually in a way Aristotle's own method.
right.
He looked at nature and he investigated all sorts of things. He out of his study of nature came form and matter, came soul and body. That's where he began. And then the metaphysics is really him saying, okay, what do all these actual living things have in common? Oh, they all have being. So what's being? And that's the birth of metaphysics. So there's uh, an intimate link between experience itself and the wish I have to understand by exercising my reason, my rationality, to understand that experience. So to say that there's a rupture between experience and the truth is a completely dualistic anthropology,
Right, right, right.
radically dualistic. Yeah.
That's spot on. And if we can kind of, if we can apply that concrete, I know you wrote something about it, Deborah, but just turning to Robert, if you,
Yeah.
how do we actually apply this? Maybe you could give us a concrete application of this
Yeah.
inductive. Well, you kind of, you guys already kind of alluded to it, but according to in the book, Robert, if you could, how does that
Yes.
work? Yeah.
Yes, well, thank you. I think the book is extremely well structured. And part one is about the philosophical and theological foundations, which Deborah has already articulated so well. But we had some outstanding authors like Janet Smith and Michelle Schumacher, Eduardo Echeverria. And then the second part is reflections on the revolution.
Mm,
Maybe there was this sexual revolution, and Deborah's already alluded to venereal disease and so on. But we had some authors who have studied this sociologically and culturally. Jennifer Robach Morse and Carl Truman and Jay
Buddhishevsky.
Bujazinski, yeah, Bujavensky, yes,
However you say it.
and looking at the existential contradictions of the sexual revolution. And so this is what has happened is people are assuming, like, this is when there was the so-called birth control commission. Some of those who wanted to change were inviting married couples into the commission, and then they were supposed to persuade these theologians, these bishops, these cardinals. Well, this doesn't work. We have to have contraception. That's the lived experience. But thanks be to God, the Holy Spirit touched the heart and mind of St. Paul VI, and he actually predicted what would happen if contraception became the norm. The exploitation of women and putting this as a tool into government programs and so on. So he actually was looking at it in terms of what this would do to people if there was the widespread use of contraception, and he was correct.
mm,
And then part three is dispatches from the front lines, and this is where Deborah has a beautiful chapter on living through the sexual revolution.
mm,
Deborah and I are about the same age, and we lived through this. And it was the 60s and the 70s. You're a little bit younger, Raphael, but it's still around. Let's put it that way. And has it really helped strengthen marriages, lead to human happiness? I mean, the Catholic moral theology is eudaimonistic, which goes back to Aristotle,
Hmm.
seeking human flourishing, well-being, happiness. And there's a lot of wounded people from the sexual revolution. And some of these chapters are quite personal, like by Marco Casanova, talking about his living as an active homosexual, and then the grace of God helping him to overcome this. And Amy E. Hamilton also experiencing this. And we have to have compassion upon these people. Sometimes they're kind of caught into almost compulsive behaviors. And it's like looking for love, but in the wrong way. And their personal experiences, just like St. Augustine in the Confessions, his personal experience with lust, where he
Yeah.
says, I was a slave to lust.
Yeah.
And then God's grace liberated him from
Hmm.
really a type of slavery.
Hmm.
And then what part four is the science of love, where there's looking at this medical and social sciences, and getting into like Angela Lanfranchi, who's a medical doctor, looks at hormonal contraception and the physiology of human sexuality. What do these contraceptive pills do to the human body?
Hmm.
And she verifies it. She medically, empirically, we could say. And then the final part, global challenges and policy considerations. Well, here's where we have some international lawyers and Catholic thinkers, Stefano Gennarini and Jane Adolph and Jennifer Bilek, looking at what's going on in the world with some of these um, global attempts to impose a kind of elitist Western view of human sexuality,
Hmm.
and cultures which are much, let us say, more family oriented,
Hmm.
and which understand that there are just two sexes, male and female, imposing an ideology. I mean, this is something that Pope Francis did speak about,
Hmm.
ideological colonization, and this comes out. But there's some, and then it also affects academia, and Monsignor or Father Piotr Mazurkiewicz has a beautiful chapter where he looks at really what counts as uh, social science is really ideologically driven.
Hmm.
And so this is a very complete book, and I give Deborah a lot of credit. I helped with the editing and some of the introductions, but Deborah really deserves the credit. It's really, I don't know of any other book that's quite like this, but maybe Deborah does.
It,
But
it, what's really fascinating is such a not easy to, well, easy to read, but it's interesting to read. So this inductive method, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, it's attractive where you focus
Hmm.
on the concrete. But I want to ask
Hmm.
you, turn to you, Deborah, because
Hmm.
you get into this really concrete, especially with contraception, if you could elaborate on that. But also,
Yeah.
there a little bit of like, um, is there a little bit of like consequentialism here in this inductive method where you're saying, look at these consequences? Look at these are the or is it not that? Because I know that can be problematic in Catholic morality, just kind of
Yeah.
judging things based on
Their
what
outcome.
yeah, the outcomes.
Yeah. Well, let me go to the lived experience part first and then circle back to the possibility of a kind of consequentialism. Um, so I could say it this way in my article in that part of the book, this dispatches from the front lines, really is the narrative part, the lived experience part is starts with the fact I was born in California, in San Francisco. I went to college an hour away from ground zero of the sexual revolution, which was really the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. Um, so I saw it happen. This was in 1970. Gosh, it's such a long time ago. But I actually, at that time, I didn't know anything about Humani Vitae. I was a Catholic, but it never got preached about. As we know, the priests were afraid to because people were upset by it. But what I saw happen was the women around me in the dorm dropping like flies because they were you could get birth control pills and they would start to take them, and some of them, of course, did not. And to be honest with you, they would have a one night stand. Let's say the young man never called back.
hmm,
That was what happened. They were preyed upon really, and kind of if you understand the way young men's bodies work, perhaps sort of understandably, but it was a license to have sex no matter what, and no real grasp of the consequences. And I was Catholic, and I said to one young man, I don't do that sort of thing. And he said to me, kind of surprised, well, I'd like to hear your reason, but it had better be a good one. And the shock that ran through me at that moment when I realized I actually didn't know why I knew it wasn't good for me to do that. That saying to him, my mom told me I shouldn't, wasn't going to fly. And so, in a way, the my take on this topic really began there when I was 18, realizing I didn't have the language to explain why, especially a woman, understands what's at stake in that act. And as I say in my essay, the woman's relationship to the sexual act is very different from that of the man's. The man's involvement is momentary. And obviously, a woman lives with the consequences the sexual act when it results in a child much more profoundly than the man does. But it's also because in a way that act is a moment when the man actually enters into her very being. She has her whole entire being is on the line there, really. Um, and it's a profound act of theft that the young woman will never recover, whether she thinks she will or not. So that's one of the themes in that chapter. It wasn't until years later that I found John Paul II and began to articulate with his help some of the things that I've been writing about for some time now. Um, so when I think it was 2018, I started to hear that people were gathering to reconsider Humanae Vitae with an idea to changing the teaching, maybe softening the teaching. I actually literally said to myself, over my dead body, because I know that that would be the ultimate betrayal for the church to relinquish her teaching on the sanctity of marriage, on the meaning of this human sexuality, on the meaning of the person, would be the final betrayal of women.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really would. It would just, yeah, from now, not even the church is going to protect us from being used as objects. And I got really angry. And the first version of that essay was published back then in one of Janet Smith's books on Humani Vitae, Why It's Still Right. Um, and so my, my story, my own personal story, is to come has been to come to the recognition of the truth of the church's teaching because of my experience during that time. The way it devastated the young people, the way it turned everything into a party. It was an orgy kind of, although hidden behind the scenes. It was just dreadful. And so there was nothing liberating about the sexual revolution, nothing at all. And I know that. No one can dissuade me of that point of view. And the evidence is all around us. So my chapter is an example of someone's lived experience that led them to search for a way of understanding my own self as a woman in relation to man and in relation to the meaning of my own body. It's been quite a pursuit. In that same section, there's, as Robert mentioned, there are two articles by two people, a man and a woman, both of whom experienced the homosexual lifestyle, who began to search because they recognized they were not happy. And they couldn't understand, if this is supposed to have achieved happiness, why isn't it? And it was through that recognition, that moment in their own lived experience, that led them to search and to find Jesus Christ and the teaching of the church. Another example is Carrie Gress, who was having a difficult pregnancy. She had a difficult pregnancy and a difficult aftermath of the pregnancy, and she couldn't understand why she felt such joy. In spite of all the suffering, she felt joy. And so her starting place was motherhood, and suddenly realizing that this joy that she felt was exactly what the church teaches will come from accepting one's own suffering. So the point here is to say to the people, yes, lived experience is important, but that the thrust of human knowing is to come to understand its meaning and not to truncate the process by assuming I want to have sex with someone who's of my own gender. I really want it, and that must mean it's right. Uh, and then I don't know, in the aftermath of that act, maybe feeling some kind of distaste or plunging into addiction or into a lifestyle that can never lead to human happiness. Um, we're trying to reach those people and say, no, you've got it wrong. You're misinterpreting the meaning of your own desire. Your desire is for completeness, for completion, and you'll never find it searching in that way. Because look at my lived experience has been that I am joyful. I'm happy. I have a child that I love dearly, a husband I love dearly. Well-being of the human being is actually what the church's teaching on human sexuality leads to,
Yeah, yeah.
because it's centuries of reflection on the meaning of all of this.
Right.
And really, I think all the metaphysics, I've written the metaphysics of this. I know exactly about Cartesian dualism. I could give talks on it, but people's eyes glaze over when you start to talk to them that way. But if you begin with their lived experience and then ask them questions about, well, that lead to them finally to recognize I'm actually not happy living this way, then that can, through their lived experience, lead them to revisit their assumptions about what really boils down to uh, an addiction to immediate gratification.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to leave that behind, to search for something really truer. And so it's not consequentialism by any means, except if you think that it's consequentialism to seek the kingdom of God. Because what we're suggesting is that if it's true that the glory of God is man fully alive, and I think that's true, then one must absolutely search for the way to arrive at that point where I'm
Hmm.
fully alive, all pistons firing.
Yeah.
And these addictions are heading in the opposite direction. And so when we're referring to the data and the results of the sexual revolution, that's where it enters, that we show that as proof that
Yeah.
you're on the wrong track,
Yeah.
that you're misunderstanding the meaning of your lived experience, so to speak.
Right.
Hmm.
And it's
Yes.
spot on when you say that about the metaphysics, how it's kind of like mitigated realist uh metaphysics, which starts from the concrete, but you're not staying there.
Yeah.
You're not staying there. You are
No,
transcending that, and
I'm saying I'm saying that if you if you do start there, you never leave experience behind, because as you progress through this process of trying to understand what does it take to be happy, you as you move away from the addictions, when you change, when you come to understand, at least in some incipient way, your telos, that experience will track. The clue is found in our experience. John Paul II actually says, as Carol Wojtyła, that lived experience is the most important philosophical category.
Hmm. I
He,
think
he, that's a quote. Sorry. Go ahead, Robert.
no, I think he was a great gift,
Oh,
John Paul II.
yeah.
We were blessed to live during his pontificate. One chapter I think is really revealing, and it really supports what you've been saying, Deborah. Is dis, Dispatches from the Front Line: The Teaching of Victims of the Sexual Revolution by
Hmm.
Anne E. Maloney.
Hmm.
And she's teaching at a Catholic college, in the upper Midwest. And we don't, but listening to the stories of young women who have experienced and still continue to experience these men who exploit them,
Hmm.
and these one night stands, and or it might last a few more times, but then the young man just leaves them. So, in other words, it's sex for the sake of pleasure without commitment.
Hmm.
And then I think some women then become hardened. They just accept
Yeah.
this as a way of life. But then how could they give themselves, and trust any man? Because their experience is men are not trustworthy.
Hmm.
But this is the whole point of linking sexual intimacy with marriage, and procreation, which
Hmm.
is what the church teaches.
Hmm.
And so once you separate sex from procreation and commitment, then what's the argument against homosexuality?
Hmm.
Homosexual relations, or if our sexuality is just something that we have control over, then it could lead to transsexualism. And
Hmm.
this is what Jay Wojcicki deals with in his chapter. It leads to transhumanism, where we're denying who we are as human beings.
Hmm.
I think what's really beautiful here, which is really rooted in John Paul II, is this synthesis of the subjective and the objective, that there
Yes.
can't be a dichotomy here, that the subjectivity is real without falling
Yeah.
into a
Subjectivism.
subjectivism.
Yep.
But subjectivity is real, and that should be linked to the objective ultimately. And really, it's Cartesian dualism that separates that.
Mm.
It's only really the Catholic view that really synthesizes them, saying no, there
Mm.
has to be a harmonization between the two. Uh,
Yeah.
I just want to mention Suarez here because I know Robert's an expert here on Suarez, and Suarez is interesting here because I do see Suarez philosophy imbued here. He's not a nominalist, but he does consider some nominalist claims, saying, because in traditional Thomism, they say basically they would say that the first thing we know is being itself, but really Suarez would say the first thing we know is the concrete thing. That's
Hmm.
the first thing we know. So it's really interesting how this shift in neo-scholasticism, at least, or second scholasticism, what have you, is this shift to the concrete, and
Hmm.
again, not staying there, falling into subjectivism, but transcending that. And so, is the goal here to obtain the moral law? Is that rightly said? Any one of you can chime in. Is that rightly said? The goal is to arrive at the universal moral law.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the backbone of the entire edifice of the church's teaching is the natural law in a way, right? I mean, at least at the level of reason, I suppose, although um, obviously Revelation is completely consistent with that. God is the author of all truth. So it, that I think that's exactly right, that um, what the culture has suggested we do, and I would say the evil one has suggested we do, is take uh, an experience, uh, let's say lived, but maybe just one personal experience, maybe a series of them, and decide that's the end of the story. Now I know who I am. John Paul, in his what you said, let me say it this way. John Paul's effort is absolutely to find a way to understand the relationship between the objective and the subjective. His whole anthropology is a blend of Thomist metaphysics and phenomenological method. And what he's saying is he absolutely invokes, appropriates all of Thomas's metaphysical anthropology, where we fit in the order of creation. The natural law is present in all of his teaching. But what he's saying is that that's just simply not enough to account for the fullness of human experience, the fullness of human being, because man is not just a subject of existence. He's not just man in the abstract that you can define. He is a person, and what is the meaning of his own personal acts? That's what the acting person is about, really. And so he has in mind when he talks about experience as partial, and this is where phenomenology will come in. He will say that that partial experience has to be integrated into the whole of who you are. You can't just go on the partial experience is always only ever partial. So how is that integrated into the whole? And the whole that he has in mind is the person as understood by the church via Thomas's metaphysical anthropology, let's say, a union of body and soul, uh, certain powers that give him the ability to reason, They
Mhm.
give him a body that communicates meaning. And his project is this incredible thin synthesis of both those schools of thought in which he's trying to reveal to us that through our lived experience, we discover the truth if we pursue it properly. In the very Taught Splendor, the article in the first part, the Foundations part by Janet Smith, is really revealing how John Paul II in Veritatis Splendor is trying to help us see that the principles of the natural law are accessible in human experience.
Mhm. Yes.
We know when we're falling off the log.
That's
And
right.
the reason people are unhappy is because they're refusing to see that. And so now what you have, the way I put it in my article is two or three generations now of wounded women and juvenile males walking around completely confused about what's next
Mhm.
because nobody has said to them that or helped them understand that sexual gratification per se is not the way to happiness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
Yeah,
and,
no, very, very
and
well said. Yeah. Robert, you wanted to chime in?
no, I would just say we also have to ultimately consider the theological element of this and the need for divine grace, which
Mm,
heals us. You
mm,
see, and Suarez was very strong. I mean, that grace and free will work together. You know,
mhm.
God is not going to, He wants us to freely love Him.
Right.
And this is there in St. Thomas as well. It's the Catholic tradition. But there's that mysterious interplay between human cooperation and divine grace.
Yeah.
But Suarez says God will look for situations which are congruous with which will enable the person to freely accept the offer of grace. And sometimes that's where lived experience, if we could jump ahead, comes into play. People then sometimes realize they're unhappy.
Mhm,
They're looking for something deeper, and that's maybe where there's a cry towards God, and then
mhm,
God could make use of their brokenness to lead them to freely
mhm,
accept His help to get them out of these addictive, self-destructive behaviors.
Mhm.
And but this is where the social element and the political element is rather significant because some people, there are people suffering with gender dysphoria, and no one's there to help them. It's almost illegal to try to help them. Or
mhm,
that there's some people who are not happy with homosexual orientation. And then to say, well, you're a wounded person, we want to help you. And like with a man, to rediscover your masculinity.
mhm.
And unfortunately, because now an ideology has controlled the government in many situations, it's illegal to try to help people overcome same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I think this is and Pope Francis has mentioned the inductive method is because we kind of live in a post-Christian society, though there are some lights down that seems to be changing, but people in a sense almost have to hit rock bottom. Like they have
Mhm,
to come through the truth because we don't live in a, in a medieval Christian society. They come through the truth through living like, kind of like falling, right? You falling,
mhm,
you hit you good to the dregs, and then you realize, man, this is I need to get
mhm,
out of this, and then you see the
mhm.
truth. So I don't know what you guys think about that. It seems like that's to be the case.
Yes, I'm glad you bring that up because another purpose for the volume is to give give people in pastoral situations or therapeutic situations the permission to start with someone's experience. I think sometimes faithful Catholics are nervous about even bringing this up because they feel they'll be compromised. It'll be evidence that they affirm that person's lifestyle or that person's choices. simply by engaging in a conversation. But I say, no, no, you got that backwards. You have to help them see that they're, well, let me back up and say the best way to start with someone like that is by asking them about their lived experience. And John Paul would affirm that because he would say, yes, what you need to always keep in mind is the whole into which that lived experience must be integrated. So, if you say to someone who's told you that they think they might want to transition to, another gender, another sex, and you say, well, where did you first experience that urge? Or where is it located in your body? Or help me understand what that would even look like. Um, uh, you know, that's just the start of the conversation of your effort to help them sort of retrace their steps, uh, to realize that it was some kind of traumatic experience, or a friend. They caught the social contagion from a friend who's already made that move. The origin of that desire is cannot be natural, cannot be a part of their genetic makeup. It's impossible. And so, the right pastoral approach these days, especially from what you just said, is to start with someone's experience and ask a lot of questions as you yourself are thinking, uh, about the more comprehensive picture the usual faithful Catholic uh, has in mind. Because when that person tries to integrate, or what they'll end up seeing maybe is that urge cannot be integrated into the wholeness of what I am as a man or as a woman.
Mhm, mhm,
Persuade them that their body has meaning, and that you can't be thrown out as some kind of meaningless object, just an appendage that's carrying you around like a helium balloon. So anyway,
Yeah, and
I,
it's
I real this is really my concern. I've met plenty of those people because they're always arguing with me. And they'll say, you can't, why, I think I'm a woman or something like that. And I'll say, well, if you think you're a woman, then don't you think you better find out what that actually means?
yeah.
right,
Because it's more than lipstick and high heels.
right, right.
And when you invite them to consider what does it really mean to be a woman when they're a man, they will come face to face with the fact that it's impossible.
Mhm,
Yeah.
Now, the reason I wanted to focus a lot on this method, because I think this is where the antidote is.
Mm,
The last comment, I'll leave it to you guys for the last word. But because I think where our living, there's like a dualism resurrected, like a neo-Gnosticism, where
hmm.
people are denying their subjectivity in a sense of saying, like you see this obviously in the trans movement where no, everything on me says I'm a man, but I'm a woman. So there's this dichotomy that they're split between they're affirming something and they're denying their very subjectivity they're denying. So this is dualism from Gnosticism coming up. And I think that inductive method, the way you guys portray it based on John Paul II, is very much again kind of trying to bring back harmonization. No. You conform to reality. Your subjectivity
Yeah.
conforming to objectivity. And I think that's why I wanted to focus a lot on the method. Forgive me that we didn't kind of get
No.
into a lot of but I think that for me that was the key point there. And I appreciate you guys beginning with that and kind of elaborating. As Robert said, the first part very philosophical. It's very important. Again, get this book. It's excellent. It's worth the read. It's fun to read. In the sense that it's interesting to read, I should say. And it's I read your chapter, Deborah, like usually I don't, I'll read some pages here or there, but I read it like in one day. And it's like 15 pages, that chapter there, 15, 20 pages. So and the print is pretty, there's a lot of words on each page. So
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's great, and I read it right through. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down, and that's usually I can easily put a book down, but this time I couldn't. So thank you guys very much. I give you guys the last word if you want to say anything. Robert, if you wanted to chime in here. Again, thanks for coming on, and again, buy the book for my viewers.
Um, uh, well, I felt blessed to be asked to be part of this, and people I very much admire contributed to it, and including I'll mention Deborah's colleague John Crosby,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
who's really one of the greatest experts on personalism, John Paul II and Dietrich von Hildebrand. But his chapter on why subjectivity reveals man as a person is just superb. It's like a little a summary of this this personalist approach, this phenomenological approach. But we need both. We need the abstract moral norms, but we also need experience. That's why
Mhm.
Aristotle said, really, it's not until a person is 30 years old that he or she could really begin studying ethics, because
Mhm.
you have to draw upon experience
Mhm.
in ethical situations. And it's also helpful for priests and pastoral ministers
Mhm.
to have a language by which they could listen to people, but then sort out really the sometimes people are pretending to be happy because they want to justify a lifestyle that gives them, a temporary pleasure, but deep down they're wounded individuals,
Mhm.
and we have to listen to them. I think Jason Everett has a beautiful chapter about reverent curiosity, why the church needs to listen to gender dysphoria. In other words, a real compassion is you listen to these wounded people and not just affirm them in their woundedness. Oh, yes, yeah, this is what, you are really a man, though you have a woman's body. You really are a woman, though you have a man's body. No, the church has to be mature and true compassion, which has confidence not only in the abstract teachings of the church, the moral norms, but that this teaching corresponds to personal subjective experience. So that's where I think the book's very helpful. But we should give Deborah the last word.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
I don't know if I could add much to that. That's really well said. I think I would just end by saying that we need not be afraid to include or address or invite reflection on someone's lived experience. Even if their lived experience, we know on the face of it is reflects a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Because unless that can be raised to the light, unless light can be shed on it, in light of the great truths of the faith, there isn't any real hope of helping. So
Mm-hmm.
Pope Francis, God rest his soul, I would say was an complete, his focus was the pastoral.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely honor that. We are a kind of field hospital. So where does that pastoral outreach begin? Well, certainly he's right, not with lectures about Thomist metaphysics, but it certainly can't end
Mm-hmm.
by simply listening to experiences and affirming those that seem to be reflective of a disorder, right? So the as you said, Raphael, the the subjective and objective dimensions of human knowing um, have to be understood and embraced without lapsing into any kind of subjectivism. No, one of my favorite theologians, Bernard Lonergan, said, knowledge cannot exist without minds. And of course, God has a mind, so we need not worry about that being some kind of weird statement. Human knowing involves human minds. And so there's always going to be a subjective component to that which we know. The trick is to arrive at the point where my own subjectivity is fully congruent, fully in line with God's plan for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the natural law, the way I'm meant to be. Yeah. I don't know if that's a good way to end or not,
Yeah,
but
yeah, that's an excellent way. And well, thank you both for coming on.
yeah,
It's been
thank
a
you for the
really
time.
we could definitely have extended this. We could talk a whole day on this stuff, but it's excellent. And again, buy the book, link description, the link on in the description to get it. And thank you very much. Hope to have you guys on a future episode. And God bless you and take
God
care.
bless
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
God
you.
bless you, Raphael. God bless you and your family, Deborah.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
God
Thank you.